Okay, so we're going to start talking about RSpec and Rails. We got a brief introduction to RSpec recently, and I don't know how many of you have actually sort of taken to heart our advice that as you do these homeworks, even though right now we're providing test cases for you, we wanted you to start reading the test cases just to sort of understand what they look like and start getting kind of by osmosis, getting a sense of what RSpec code looks like. Because now we're going to start talking about it in a lot more detail. And interestingly, as Dave said, the previous cohort of students, when we introduced BDD to them, I was afraid that BDD and Cucumber would be where the cognitive sticking point was, because it's a new tool, it's a new kind of language that, it's not actually code, it's kind of somewhere between code and natural language. But in fact, students, once they kind of had gotten used to doing it, they really embraced it, and I think they absorbed the fact that it was a natural way to communicate with a customer and also express integration tests. So that was great. What we didn't expect was that people had more difficulty than we anticipated grasping the unit and functional testing at the level that you would do with RSpec. So hopefully this time around we will do even better. And we already got introduced to the idea that RSpec is this domain-specific language for testing. We already know, because we have been following along looking in the homeworks, that there is a spec directory. And what we haven't told you yet is just like we have a generator that we used, for example, when we created migrations, it creates some empty code for you in the right places. There's a generator that you can run on your Rails app, Rails generate RSpec install, that will generate all the directories so that tests will be placed in the right locations that it expects to find them. Now, in the homeworks we've had so far, we've really just had two subdirectories of interest. There's a lib subdirectory where your code goes, and there's a spec subdirectory where the tests go. And in fact, in order to keep the tests a little bit better organized for Rails apps, there's actually three different kinds of tests we're going to write. There's the unit test, which mostly tests the model, sometimes tests the helpers. There's functional tests, which mostly test controller methods. And what about integration tests? Could we write RSpec tests around views? Well, some people do, some people don't. There's sort of mixed opinion about it. Our view is that integration testing is really part of the process of coming to agreement with the customer. So our view is that it's fine to use Cucumber as the way of expressing your integration test, because you can express things like what should appear or should not appear in the views. But having said that, be aware that even though we're not going to talk about it much in this class, you can in fact write specs for your views. And we'll give some examples of the kind of things you might put into a spec for a view if you were to write one. So in terms of Rails application, just like we have subdirectories for models and controllers and views, there's a parallel hierarchy under spec where our model specs, controller specs, and if we wrote view specs, there would be a place for them, but we're fine having everybody just use Cucumber for that. So the example we're going to pick up on is going back to the BDD example where we're adding this method where we're hypothetically going to call out to the TMDB service and be able to populate our movie database using information from that. And remember that the setup for this was in the SAD path for the Cucumber test, there was a step, and I pressed search TMDB. And the idea is that in a fully working app, that would invoke a controller method that would actually cause the external service to be queried, return the data, and then put that data into our model. So we're not going to pick up on what would we do to actually fill out that example. Remember we said that there's this sort of BDD-TDD interaction. You start with a step of a Cucumber scenario, and because there's no code, that step will fail. And now we're going to get to the point where, OK, time to write the code for that step to pass. So we're recursively going to take the same idea. We're going to first think about what we would like that code to do, how we wish it would behave if we had it. We're going to write tests that capture those behaviors, and then sort of piecemeal, we're going to backfill the code so that it does what the tests say that it should do. Right? Conceptually not very difficult, feels totally unnatural the first time you do it. So you're going to have to stick with us. So recall when we said when you're adding new functionality to a Rails app, there's these kind of things you always have to do. You have to add a new route, new controller method, and new view. We're now going to focus on the controller method. And we're going to ask, what should the controller method do when it receives the search form? And what we said before when we were planning out this feature is that it should call a method that will search TMDB for the specified movie. And if it finds a match for that movie, it should select the search results view, display the match, et cetera. So let's just start with that much. When it says the controller method should do these things, we can actually capture this in normal code. And OK, here is the RSpec-centric version of what I just said. I said that when we have a controller method that's going to search TMDB, it should call the model method that performs the search. It should select the search results template for rendering, assuming that that worked out. And it should make the search results available to that template so that the template has something to display. So all I've really done is translate, almost think of this as like a user story, but for the programmer, right? just as we were able to sort of take the customer specified behavior and write a Cucumber story, we're now talking about at the level of code we want to write, what does that code have to be able to do? And this is all actually legal RSpec, right? These are 3 test cases beginning with it that we haven't written yet. And if you've been looking through some of the test cases that come with the homeworks, you would know that if we put a do end block after each one of these, that's where the code would go that actually does each of those tests. So let's see what that would take. OK, so let's do a sanity check on this first. Remember that we're about to add new functionality to our app, and we're going to have this method at some point that actually has to contact TMDB and search for a movie. So just so that we're all on the same page about what we need to do, is that method going to be a class method in movie, an instance method in movie, a method in the controller, or a helper method?